Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This thing working right? Yes, I guess it is. I'm Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, our April Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. As veterans of this breakfast will recall, I generally begin with something out of this morning's Washington Times, and I will do that now because we still live in interesting times. And here on the front page of the commentary section of today's Washington Times, there's a lead op-ed piece, and the first paragraph of it reads, Barack Obama is not just our first biracial president. He was supposed to be our first post-racial president. Instead, he joins forces with race hustler Al Sharpton and escalates a tragic shooting into an inflamed, full-blown national race fight. What happened? Well, the gentleman who wrote that is our featured speaker here today, and I am, like you, looking forward to what he has to say. In 2012, the Leadership Institute has already trained 3,048 students, and since 1979, your Leadership Institute has trained over 106,173 students. You have before you on the goldenrod sheets of paper a listing of currently scheduled schools for this year. Obviously, we schedule many more during the year, but I urge you to take a look at this schedule and consider attending one of these programs or sending a friend. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you the Institute's grassroots coordinator, Christopher Doss. Chris will offer an invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Chris?
Our invocation this morning is from George Washington's prayer book. If you join with me, please. O eternal and everlasting God, I presume to present myself this morning before thy divine majesty, beseeching thee to accept of my humble and hearty thanks that it hath pleased thy great goodness to keep and preserve me the night past. I beseech thee to defend me from all perils of body and soul. Direct my thoughts, words, and work. Wash away my sins in the immaculate blood of the Lamb, and purge my heart by thy Holy Spirit from the dross of my natural corruption, that I may with more freedom of mind and liberty of will serve thee, the everlasting God, in righteousness and holiness this day and all the days of my life. Increase my faith in the sweet promises of the gospel. Give me repentance from dead works, pardon my wanderings, and direct my thoughts unto thyself, the God of my salvation. Teach me how to live in thy fear, labor in thy service, and ever to run in the ways of thy commandments. Make me always watchful over my heart, that neither the terrors of conscience, the loathing of holy duties, the love of sin, nor an unwillingness to depart this life may cast me into a spiritual slumber, but daily frame me more and more into the likeness of thy Son, that living in thy fear and dying in thy favor, I may in thy appointed time attain the resurrection of the just unto eternal life. Bless my family, friends, and kindred. Unite us all in praising and glorifying thee, and all our works begun, continued, and ended, when we shall come to make our last account before thee, our Father. We ask these things in thy holy name. Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was well done. It is now my opportunity to introduce to you our speaker, Dr. Milton Wolfe. Your little green folders have biographical information. He is a full-time practicing radiologist. He and I spoke today about how he got started into this newspaper commentary business, and he told me he had something he wanted to say, and he wrote it, and it wasn't easy, but he polished it and submitted it, and it ran, and then he decided later to try it again, and that one got published. And then one day they contacted him from the Washington Times and asked him if he would begin a regular column for them. And he wondered about that. He obviously is full-time in his profession, and he worried that he could put out a steady stream of high-quality stuff, and he began it, and it was a little difficult at first. But as he told me this morning, he found it easier and easier. And before long, rather than putting out 2 columns per month, he found himself putting out more. And he found that weekly was not excessive. But he told me one thing that he has that others I know who are regularly published columnists, he has an agreement with them that he doesn't have to put out a column on any set deadline. Having myself produced columns over a period of years for different publications, I know what an ease that would be if the muse doesn't sit on your shoulder and whisper in your ear one week. If you don't have to write something, that means that when the muse finally does perch on your shoulder, then you can write consistently high-quality material. And those of us who are regular readers of the Washington Times know full well that the column that appears in this morning's Washington Times is typical of the high quality of communications that this gentleman is capable of. I'd never seen a photograph of him, but over these years, I came to look forward to what he had to say because he really does communicate well. And I thought, well, if he writes well, let's see if he speaks well. And my discussions with him this morning across the breakfast table indicate that he speaks very well indeed. So here is our speaker, and I, like you, look forward to hear the message he has for us this morning. Dr. Milton Wolfe.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I'll tell you, when you speak from the heart, it's a whole lot easier to know what you're going to say. Before I start, I have to say I'm still kind of revved up. Are any basketball fans here? NCAA basketball fans? There we go. Now I just came from Kansas, and we had it's kind of a somewhat of a difficult year. We took second. We consider second in the nation, of course. And in Kansas, we consider that to be a rebuilding year. Is there anybody here? The Big 12, if you're familiar with basketball, Big 12 is breaking up, and the classic, what we call the border war rivalry between Kansas and Missouri is going to be a thing of the past. Is there anybody here from Missouri, by chance? I'll try to speak slowly and use small words. No, I'm sorry, and I can't help but kid. I think of Kansas and Missouri. I'm going to miss the border war rivalry because it's been It's something that we've just treasured on both sides of that state line. And I think of Kansas and Missouri like two brothers. We will fight each other without mercy, but if someone else steps in, we will defend each other without pause. But I have to tell you this, I'm proud to be a Kansan. I am proud to have earned those calluses on my hands growing up as a kid on a Kansas farm. I am proud, and in fact, I'm probably more humbled that Kansans, Kansas patients have entrusted me and put their lives in my hands. But most of all, I got to tell you this, I'm very proud of the unique role that Kansas plays in our union. We've been protecting America from Missouri since 1854. If you're anything like me, when a phone number from the White House shows up in your caller ID, your first inclination is somebody's playing a pretty good practical joke on you. And if you're anything like me, when the voice on the other end says the president would like to meet with you, then your first thoughts harken back to high school when the secretary's voice came over the intercom and said the same thing about the school principal. I must have really done something wrong. The first phone call like that came when I was driving in eastern Kansas under a just brilliantly lit, starry sky, and I started pondering this meeting that we were about to have, and I realized where I was, and I was driving over some of the grounds that were stained with the real border war patriots some years ago, and I thought back to how divided our country was at that time, and how similarly divided our country is today. The Civil War tore our country apart. It ripped families in two. It pitted brother against brother, and today our country is similarly divided, but for different reasons. It's not regional differences, of course, between the North and the South, or even over the evils of slavery. Instead, it's that enduring struggle that defines us as Americans. It's that collision of two worldviews between liberty and tyranny, and I know something about what that can do to a family. It's true that Barack Obama and I are cousins, and I'm genuinely proud to call him family. I think he is a caring man, and I think he means well. But I think he profoundly misunderstands America and what makes us exceptional. He believes our greatness lies in our regulations and our bureaucracies and an ever-growing government that treats us not as citizens but as subjects. In short, he believes our government is too small. I believe that our greatness is found in our freedom. Our greatness is found in our free people. I believe in our founding principles of limited government, of constitutional fidelity, of fiscal responsibility. I believe in the free market, and all of that really just means I believe in you to live your life as you see fit. And so I chose to go public. And when you do that, everything that can be said, that could have been said about me has been. I appreciate, I understand better what General Washington was talking about when he spoke of the charming sound of bullets that whistle by you. You know, and when I first went, and I would never dare to compare myself to the founder of our country, but when I first went public, I'll never forget, on one day, someone said of me, you know, you should be the next president of the United States. And the next breath of someone else said, you know, no, I think you have a mental disorder. And both of those came from within my own family. So I decided I had to go public. I had to take a stand for my patients, for my profession. I knew I had to take a stand for my country. And when I saw what was happening, I knew I had to do anything that I could. I had to be here today to take a stand with you because America deserves that. And so I started on this, and you know, newspapers, you know, television, and doing all these things, and you know, the reporters that show up at the door, and the phone doesn't stop ringing, and you know, it does get kind of overwhelming at times, and but I have to say, as much as I've gone after Barack, and I've been criticized by so many people, but I've never been criticized by anyone who has said that I've been unfair to him, that I've said a lie about him, or that I've attacked him personally. And I will tell you this, I will defend Barack from any pointless personal attacks that are levied by anyone, because we don't need them. We have too much of that in politics. It doesn't need to be personal. So I have made the pledge that I will go after him for every policy disagreement that I have with him, but I will never attack him personally. But I will tell you this, and I will make you this pledge today, that if I must, if Barack Obama continues his assault on American freedom, then I will launch the mother of all family feuds to save our republic. You know, because when all of these things started when all these things started coming out, when I went public, and he and I discussed some of these things, and I would never betray the confidence of some of these discussions. But and Mr. Blackwell, you brought up the column that's in today's paper, and that I think is a very good starting point. It's very difficult for me to see some of the things that are happening today, particularly with the shooting that now has become a national issue, the Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman shooting. And Barack and I actually have a lot in common. We've come to find out, not necessarily in political beliefs, but the most important person in his life was taken from him at a young age. His mother, the most influential person in his life, and I too have suffered the same tragedy. My father was taken from me at far too young of an age, and both of them were the instrumental people in our lives to help guide us to who we are. My father was a rural doctor and believed in American liberty. His mother, of course, was a Marxist. And both of us have tried to continue on, I think, picked up the flag and continued on with what our parents were all about. I'm trying to heal the sick and preserve our liberty. Barack is trying to enslave humanity with an ever-growing government. So we don't agree on everything, and that's okay. And so I look at what's going on with this shooting and how it really saddens me. I don't know another way to describe it than how sad it is that our president's approached it in the way he has. When a 17-year-old dies, that's a tragedy. There's no way around it. Whether George, and I'm not going to try the case here because, you know what, I don't have the facts. But I do know this, whether George Zimmerman acted appropriately or inappropriately, whether he acted in self-defense or with malice, it's a tragedy that a 17-year-old died. And sadly, our president, who is uniquely positioned as the first biracial president in American history, had an opportunity to bring our country together in a way that probably only he could. And even to this day, probably only he could. And sadly, he chose not to. Sadly, he's chosen to try to inflame the situation and divide us even further. And whatever your political belief is, I think as Americans, we deserve better. This has been one of the more difficult, frankly, one of the more difficult columns for me to write, because I try to stay away from the personal, and this felt very personal. I will share one small thing with you. As much as I promised that I would keep any words that I have with the president in confidence, I couldn't help myself, and I asked him a question that made both of us laugh. One of us nervously and one of us proudly. But I asked him if I'm the only Tea Partier he knows. Obamacare is the defining issue of our lifetime, and it's probably going to be one of the defining issues that not only of our lifetime, but of our children and our children's children. It's that important. It represents a turning point in our country that will redefine our nation, that will make us something that we are not. Now, about a year or more ago, I wrote a column called "Obamacare's Unkeepable Promises." It didn't take a terribly smart person to look at some of the promises they were making and realize that these were not going to be kept. You know, when they promise they can ensure 40 million more people, provide everybody with the same or better quality health care, and costs will go down. You know, they might as well promise it's not going to rain on weekends. And so I wrote a column, and now those Obamacare Unkeepable promises have become the Obamacare lies. And I know that's a difficult word, and we don't like to use that word. We like to say someone misled or misinformed or they misspoke. But I think we need to be precise in our language. And a lie is when we give a false statement and the maker knows it to be untrue and does so for the purpose of deceiving us. And there's no other way around this. Barack promised that you could keep your insurance or keep your doctor. We know that was a lie. We know that now the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, has said that up to 20 million Americans will lose their employer-based insurance as a direct result of Obamacare. He made this firm pledge that if you earn under $250,000, you won't have any increased taxes. Obamacare has no less than 20 new or increased taxes, all of them falling on people who make less than $250,000. It raises taxes on everything from tampons to tanning salons. This hits everyone in America. They promised that they would bring premiums down by $2,500 a year per family. Kaiser Foundation has said recently it's actually premiums are up about $1,300. Other estimates are they're saying they're up $2,200. Nancy Pelosi, God bless her. Nancy Pelosi promised that Obamacare would create 4 million new jobs, 400,000 almost immediately. Yeah, none of those have shown up in Kansas yet. I don't know if you found them here. CBO estimates that Obamacare will cost 800,000 jobs. But the biggest lie of all, they never even spoke. They never even put into words. The biggest lie of Obamacare was that they believed that the government could decide health care for you better than you can for yourself. They believe that the government can spend your money more wisely than you can yourself. And that's the greatest lie of all. But you have to ask yourself the question, if Obamacare is so good, why are the Democrats always lying about it? It's the same thing with the waivers. Now, some thousand some waivers later, and we have to ask ourselves that go to their best friends, that go to the unions, go to their supporters. You have to ask yourself the question: if Obamacare is so good, why does the White House try to exempt its best friends from it? It's because Obamacare is not good, and it's very simple. You can really cover it in 3 simple areas. If you look at the cost, the constitutionality, and the control. They promised it would be around a $900 billion, bargain basement price, $900 billion. There was once a time where $900 billion was a lot of money. Now it's a good deal. They promised $900 billion. That price tag recently, as you know, just jumped to 1.76, I believe, trillion dollars, just basically doubled. Now those are both estimates, and since they estimated Medicare, they were off with their Medicare estimates by a factor of 10. How far off do you think they are on Medicare? I mean, America simply can't afford this. We're $16 trillion in debt. We have another $50 to $75 trillion in unfunded obligations just for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid alone. Now, those numbers are mind-boggling. There's probably not a one of us in this room that can really make sense of that. So let's think of it in this way. The national debt right now, that's $138,000 per taxpayer. Give that just a little thought. Let that sink in. But that's not all you owe, because we have these unfunded obligations. These unfunded obligations come out to around, on top of the 138, $450,000 per taxpayer. Now, on top of that, Barack Obama thinks you're not spending enough, you're not giving enough of your money to the government, and wants to take more. The constitutionality. I'm not a constitutional expert, and I won't claim to be. But I have read our Constitution, and I have studied it. And I find nowhere in the enumerated powers the right of the government, the power of the government, to take away our right to decide whether or not we want to buy health insurance or what kind of health insurance we want to buy. Of course, if we had to limit our laws to what the Constitution actually says, we would lose a lot of our laws. They wouldn't get to pick our cars or our light bulbs or anything else. The control. And this is what's really sad about Obamacare. It was never about health care. It was about control. It was about putting you into the health insurance that they wanted you to have, because once they can control that, they know if they can get in between you and your doctor, there's not a single part of your life they cannot touch. And believe me, they try. Come and follow me a day in the hospital and watch what they already do to the medical practice. Watch how much of my day is spent pleasing the bureaucrats instead of pleasing the patients. If we would like to talk about saving healthcare dollars, there are ways to do it without sending all of that control to Washington. But look what they did just recently with the contraception, with the Catholics and the contraception. You know, when Obamacare gives the Health and Human Services Secretary the power to not just tell a religion how they will practice, but to actually define what is a religion and what is not. The Secretary Sebelius, of course, former Kansan, Secretary Sebelius has the power to decide what constitutes the Catholic Church. If you stay in the 4 walls of what we'll call your church building, we'll call you the church. But if you step out of your church into a church mission, such as education or hospital, we're not going to consider you a church anymore, and therefore you're under our control. Now that's an absolute assault on our freedom. Now I'm not a Catholic, I wasn't born a Catholic, but I'll tell you this. Today we are all Catholics, because if we don't stand with the Catholics today, no one will stand with us when the government comes after us. So the bottom line is this: Obamacare will die. Obamacare will die one of 3 different deaths. It's either going to die a judicial death, and hopefully that actually does occur, or it's going to die a political death, and hopefully it dies both of those. Because if it doesn't die one of those, it's going to die the 3rd death, and this will be the tragedy. It will die an economic death. But if it dies an economic death, it's going to take America down with it. So, you know, Obamacare came, and let me say this on the Supreme Court. I hope and I pray that they uphold our Constitution. I hope that they send this law back from where it came. But I'm not counting on them that they will. And whether they do or whether they don't, it is still upon us as American citizens to go after this thing. This needs to die a political death. There are 219 congressmen, there are 60 senators, and there are 1 president that need to be sent packing. And politically speaking, we need to level their cities and salt their fields and make sure the rest of the world knows we will not tolerate politicians who will betray our will. So I go around the country. I have the great opportunity to speak with so many folks, and I know I criticize Barack a lot, and I hope I've never been personal about it, but every time I do, I get emails and phone calls from aunts and uncles and my mom and all this stuff, and my mother loves what I'm doing, but she also adores him, and she kind of thinks of it like two brothers fighting. I'm not going to get in between you, sort of approach, and that's fine. And but she said, why don't you just try to say something nice about him sometime? Can you say something good about him? I'm like, well, so I started thinking about this, and I thought, a lot of people do give him a hard time, and it's got to be difficult to be criticized all the time. And I'd like to try to defend him if I can. People give him a hard time for going around the world in his, America apology tour and bowing to foreign leaders, even our adversaries. Now, look, I can't defend bowing to foreign leaders, and especially our adversaries. When I can't imagine what was going through his mind that he would think it's in the American people's best interest for the American president, the commander-in-chief, to bow before the Saudi king, the country that produced 15 of the 19 terrorists on 9/11. I'll never understand that. But I have to confess this. I can understand a little bit that compulsion, that need to apologize for somebody you care about. I mean, after all, I'm related to Barack Obama. So, I start doing all the media. I start going out there doing the shows, the Sean Hannity, the Curvy Couch, Rush Limbaugh, Drudge Report, all these kinds of things, and, talk radio, and all these, really fun things. I even launched my own Barack apology tour, and I think I've hit most of the 57 states. I remember one just beautiful, crisp morning in Pittsburgh, and I had the wonderful opportunity to address a crowd at the historic Allegheny Landing. And I remember what Barack had said about people from Pennsylvania, and really what he said about all of us from Middle America. You remember this, that he was caught on mic to say that we were bitter clingers, that we bitterly cling to our God, our guns, and as he says, our antipathy towards people who are different from us, or put another way, your racism. And I wanted them to know. I wanted to apologize for that, frankly, because not everybody in our family thinks in that way. And so I said to them this: my name is Milton Wolfe. I love the Lord our God. My firearm of choice is the Glock 23, and I have antipathy towards no man, only towards bad government that destroys our freedom. And so, I am tough on him. I know, and sometimes I think, well, maybe I shouldn't be so rough. I'll tell you one thing I can say that's nice about him. He's a wonderful and gifted speaker. I wish I could speak as eloquent as he does, as eloquently as he does. But I have to, then again, I don't have an advanced team setting up a teleprompter in every grade school classroom I visit either. No. So I searched high and low, and I thought, there's got to be some program he's done. There's got to be something I can be supportive of. And I finally found one of everything, of all the disasters that is Obamacare, that is Obamanomics, that is his government takeover of everything. There's one thing I absolutely love: cash for clunkers. Now I know what you're thinking. What? No, I don't love Cash for Clunkers because it was a great program. It was a miserable failure. Anybody who knows anything about economics knows that it was a tragedy in the money that was spent and wasted. But for a $4 billion price tag, we got to learn just how miserable the government is at trying to manage economies. And consider Cash for Clunkers. It's probably one of the least expensive lessons we could have to teach people how bad stimulus is, how bad bailouts are, how bad all of these things are. It's the government deciding what car you should drive because they know better than you, and giving welfare to middle-class Americans. It wasn't the poor who were out there buying cars. And then doing so because we're going to save the world from this imaginary global warming. And not only that, but we get the cost overruns, we get the corruption, we get the cars that were supposedly destroyed and yet they show up elsewhere. And I would debate any economist anywhere, where in any venue, to say, tell me that it's in a nation's best interest to take your resources to destroy your resources. And I have to tell you something, I'm kind of proud. I'm the only doctor in the history of this country. In fact, I'm probably the only doctor in the history of humanity that drives a car that's officially been declared a clunker by his own cousin-in-chief. But let me tell you this, it's not a clunker, it's an SUV. He just doesn't think I should be allowed to drive one. So we were out about a year or two ago, we were buying our high school daughter a car, her first car, and we wanted to put her in an SUV because they're a little safer. And guess what? The price tags of all of them went up. You couldn't find them anymore. And the dealer told us, of course, we were buying a used car, and he said, you know, the price you're paying for this is probably about between $2,000 and $3,000 more than what it was just a little bit ago, because they're all gone. You can't find this price level of car. So there's the other end of cash for clunkers. What it really did is it hurt the people who could least afford to be hurt. It hurt the people that $2,000 or $3,000 was the difference between having a car, between being able to make it to the hospital or make it to their job. And that's liberalism. Now look, I had to pay $2,000 or $3,000 extra for that car. Don't feel sorry for me. That's okay. As much as I hated it, I could take on that burden. All I did was I just deducted a couple $1,000s out of my extended family Christmas shopping budget. But look, let's be serious for a moment and look at America in the hands of Barack Obama. We have an authoritarian, unconstitutional, command and control healthcare system. We have a failed $1 trillion stimulus where he promised shovel-ready jobs that later he even admitted don't exist. We have a $16 trillion debt, auto takeovers, bank bailouts. We have the new era of a downgraded America, and we have a president who runs around the world bowing before our adversaries. You know, yes, we can became no, we can't, but it's not my fault. Hope and change became a punchline. But Americans are still strong people, and we just cry out for leaders. We cry out for leaders who will take on these challenges, rise up to the occasion, and save America from these existential crises. And what does Barack Obama do? What does the leader of the free world want to talk about? Birth control. Birth control. You know, Nero fiddled when Rome burned, but at least he didn't shake down the taxpayers for extra free fiddles. But it leads to a very difficult question that all of us have to ask. We have to ask, who are we? Who are we going to be? America is at a crossroads. We have to make that decision between these this collision of two worldviews, between liberty and tyranny. We have to decide if we're going to be that shining city upon a hill, or if we're willing to accept Barack Obama's fate for us, that second-rate European-style social welfare state. And you know, they've told us all these things. They tell us all, the Democrats, Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, they tell us all these things we can't do. You know, we're getting into this election season, and it's, you know, really is starting to get interesting and fun. And we know what we have to do. We have to spend less. We have to get our country back on its feet. And we have to trust Americans to be Americans again. And they say, but you know what? You can't cut taxes. You can't cut taxes and balance the budget. That will just never work. I have a message for them. Yes, we can. You know, these people, they call themselves pro-choice, but they say that we're not able to choose our own health insurance, to choose our own car, or even choose our own light bulb, and I say, yes, we can. They say the basic laws of supply and demand no longer apply. That they say that you can't just drill your way to have more energy supply. You can't be energy independent unless you are bowing to Saudi kings or starting $500 million cylinder fiascos, and I say, yes, we can. They say the free market never worked. Barack Obama said free market capitalism never worked, that we are not capable of choosing our own economic destinies, and I say, yes, we can. They say we can't put patients and doctors in charge of health care again, that we have to have this massive takeover. They say we can't repeal Obamacare, and they say we can't send Barack Obama packing back to his ambition of being a community organizer, and I say, yes, we can. And so I'll leave you with this. America is in need of leaders once again. And those who came before us, whether during the Civil War or during our revolutionary time, they earned the right to call themselves Americans because they stepped out of their comfort zone. They put it all on the line for us. And we have to decide whether or not we want to be worthy of being called Americans. And that means we're going to have to step out of our comfort zone. When I was a third-year medical student, I was rotating in the obstetrics ward. And you know, I didn't know the first thing about obstetrics other than what I'd read in a book and maybe seen once or twice. And I go in to check a patient, and it turns out she's going into precipitous delivery. I mean, she's going to have this baby quickly. It was unexpected how quickly this was happening. Now, it just happened to be at the same time. There were 2 emergency cesarean sections going on, so our entire team of, you know, the attending physicians, the residents, they were all dealing with these critical issues. And the nurse is in the room with me. I'm in there, and I started to leave. And she said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to get the doctor. And she looked at me for a minute and said, you are the doctor. So I swallowed hard, and I thought, okay, I've read about this, and I've seen this. I can do it. I'm gowning up. She's helped me to get into the gown, into the gloves and the gown, and I have the patient to my back, and I learned something that day. The only time patients will ever ask you if you've ever done anything before is the first time you're about to do it. So this woman behind me breathing in a way that only pregnant women can, but between these breaths is saying, I hope you've done this before. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to say? My eyes are as big as saucer plates. I'm sweating, and what am I going to say to this? And I can't lie, but if I just introduce panic into this situation, it's not going to help her, the baby, or anyone. And so I calmed myself. I took a deep breath, started to speak in a very slow, low, deliberate voice, and I turned to her and I said, "Don't you worry, you'll be just fine." Turned back to the nurse, and the panic went right back on my face. What am I going to do? And I'm finishing gowning up, and the nurse said something to me I'll never forget. She leaned in, whispered quietly in my ear, and said, "Don't you worry, you'll be just fine too." America needs us today. We have choices to make. We have to choose between liberty and tyranny. We will stand together. We will pledge our time and our treasure. We'll pledge our sacred honors together. We will learn the charm of that sound of bullets whistling by us, and I promise you this, you'll be just fine. Thank you very much.
Here, let's take the mic.
Hello?
Yes.
Question about the medical profession. I was a little disappointed that there wasn't more pushback when Obamacare was being formulated and passed from medical professionals. What's your sense about medical people and how they see Obamacare? And
Yeah, you and me both. The American Medical Association sold us out. About 17% down to now about 17% of American doctors are a member of the AMA. The AMA bought Obamacare hook, line, and sinker. If that gives you any indication of how smart the AMA is, you might want to ask your own doctor if they're a member of the AMA, and if they are, you might want to find a smarter doctor. Number two, to be fair to doctors, I was taught in medical school, and in retrospect, they taught us wrong. But we were taught to stay out of politics. You want your patients to see you as a provider of care, not as somebody who is biased in some way or another. Now, I took that oath many years ago, and I carry the scars to prove it. But I've come to believe that I can't uphold my oath if I sit idly by and allow this to happen to my patients. So I did go public. And I'll tell you, since I've done that, I'm in a unique area in medicine in that I'm a radiologist, and that means patients don't necessarily seek out radiologists. Doctors seek out radiologists, which is a big difference. I get on, if you go and look online of ratings of doctors, I'll get negative ratings from people who are not my patient. I don't care. It doesn't affect me in any way whatsoever. But if I was out there and had my shingle hanging and trying to make a living, I could understand that. I could understand that fear. And the other part of it is the Medicare, the government has run over doctors so much. The parable of the frog and the slowly warming water. They've run over doctors so much that when they control how you treat a patient, and this is just yet one more step along the way. The sad thing is we're now hitting historic highs of doctors pulling out of Medicare, and even doctors going in retirement, pulling out altogether.
Does President Obama really believe in his heart that the only thing that's good for America is America run by the government?
I have to confess, I'm not sufficiently clairvoyant enough to really know what's in his heart. I have my suspicions.
What do you think?
I have my suspicions. I would say of a law one of the smartest Milton I know of, Milton Friedman, says we need to judge a law by its results, not by its intentions. And I would say that of Barack Obama. Judge him by his results, not his intentions. I don't know what's in his heart. I'd like to believe he wants the best for America. I just can't accept that he wants to destroy America. Now, it's a game of semantics, I suppose, because what he thinks is good for America, in my opinion, will destroy America. But I can't take that leap and cast those aspersions and put those in his heart, because I don't know. But I will fight him every step of the way on everything that he's doing, because the things that he wants to do will destroy America.
robbed Medicare of $600 billion.
The microphone?
Obamacare robbed Medicare of $600 billion. When the Supreme Court overturns Obamacare, will any of that be left, or will they already been spending it on advertising and other things to persuade Americans to believe it?
That is a great question. If you didn't hear it because the microphone wasn't working, basically the money that was taken from Medicare to go towards Obamacare, if it is overturned, will it go back? Yeah, I don't think will any of it be left? No, I don't think we're going to get that refund check. Yeah, it's been spent.
Another question, yes.
You did something a little different today than most people have. I'm from the media business, and it's gone from bias to dishonesty. The editing of the tape on the Zimmerman Trayvon Martin thing by NBC was not an error. That was done willfully by somebody.
Yes.
To come out and say that they're lying or being dishonest can diminish our credibility. But what's going on now is dishonesty. People aren't just shaping things or coming at it from a different perspective. They're lying and being dishonest. How can the rest of us address this kind of thing effectively?
I think in the same way that doctors need to have that courage to drop what I think that anachronistic advice, that naive advice to stay out of politics, I think the same thing goes with all of us whenever we see that we have to have the courage to call a lie a lie. And frankly, if we don't, then we're a party to it. And it's difficult. No one wants to hear that word. Make sure that when you're doing it, you're accurate. When I put that piece out a couple of weeks ago and I listed those lies, I didn't just paraphrase them. I quoted very specific quotes and then put the very specific information and let them deal with it. Now, interestingly, of all the criticisms I get, and I get a lot, no one ever said that I was being unfair calling those lies because it was so well documented. Choose your battles wisely. The NBC, and if you're not familiar with it, you guys need to check this out today. The NBC edited George Zimmerman's 911 call, and it was a very innocent call when you hear it in its entirety. It's only probably 30 seconds. They edited it down to about 10 seconds to make it sound very racist. And if I had heard only that, I would think so as well. And it was not an accident, like you said. Now, I also mentioned ABC News, who used graphics and covered over the back of George Zimmerman's head to hide the wounds on the back of his head, which would corroborate his story that it was self-defense. And I don't mean, again, to try the case here. But now, at least in the ABC News, you could try to make the argument that we didn't realize the graphics were in the place. They've since removed them. So was that a lie? Maybe not. Maybe there was a mistake. Now, the honest mistakes always seem to go one direction with the news. That's fine. Call them out on it every time. The American news media is like the hamburger joint that does not want to sell cheeseburgers, even though half of America wants cheeseburgers. That's fine. That's why Fox News is so successful, and that's why the internet is so successful. The Drudge Report, Instapundit, the blog world. Make sure you're looking where your news is coming from, and deal with it accordingly.
Yes, sir.
Maybe it's too early for a question like this, but are you seeing any indication that potential patients might be delaying medical care in anticipation of having to pay less sometime in the near future?
Actually, I've seen the opposite. I've seen them deciding not to be cared for because costs have already gone up. I can't say specifically because in my profession, like I say, I deal mostly with doctors, not with patients, to hear that. But I have seen fees already increase. What happens every time the government takes over is you start having these consolidations where hospitals start buying up doctors and buying up practices, and that's not a good thing. Gone are the days, or going are the days, where you can go and know that you can see your same doctor reliably because he or she's in a practice of 5 or 6 doctors. Now, all of a sudden, they're in a group of 50 or 60 doctors, and if they need a couple more doctors at a certain facility, they're shipping them off, and they're doing that with them. As they're doing that, these big institutions are able to, the way, your government working for you, charge these same patients to go to the same doctor in the same facility more because they put them through a different system. They know how to game the system. And a lot of times this is out of pocket for the patients. I know cancer patients, Kansas City, whose bills just went up $180 because the government health care in Kansas City, God bless KU Jayhawks, I love them, but I still don't want them to control health care. where they bought up a big cancer center, and instantly the patient's bills went up $180 per visit, and some of them decided to not go, have delayed their visits or have fewer visits as a direct result of that. So.
Another question over here.
Thank you for the presentation. You and I, we all know that Medicare is going belly up.
Yeah.
We all know that the government's $1 trillion in the hole. Specifically on a program like, say, Medicaid, $400 billion a year at the federal level. What changes would you make in Medicaid in terms of, would you still have the federal, as an example of being not just a critic, what helpful suggestions would you make if you were in charge of healthcare in America? What would you do with Medicaid?
Thank you for asking that question. Wolf care. Or maybe we should call it Milton care. That sounds just a little nicer. We don't want the government to be in the business of healthcare because they do such a bad job of it. We're going to have to do several things. We have to, number one, we're going to have to change the tax laws and make it uncouple insurance from employment. Let's have tax fairness so that people can buy their own insurance. You shouldn't be trapped in a job because you have a medical condition and you're afraid of losing your insurance. Number two, we got to get the lawyers out of the healthcare business as well, which Barack Obama didn't want to even begin to. Number three, this is not a constitutional objective, but it's a moral one, and that is we as Americans need to take care of everyone who cannot take care of themselves. And I suspect there's not a single person in this room or a single person in this country who would disagree with that. I think the cruelest fate we can do is to make promises to patients that we can't keep, and that's what we're doing now. What I would much rather see, the first step is start block granting and moving the money out to the states and let them decide how to run this program. Ultimately, what I would like to see is both Medicare and Medicaid, both of them turned into a premium assistance program. Let the patients go and buy whatever insurance they want. Let them buy it from whichever carrier they want. Break down the state rules. I've advocated in my state to get rid of all insurance mandates and open the floodgates and let companies from 50 states compete for Kansas patients. When Kathleen Sebelius started raising all the mandates, she chased almost a dozen companies out of our state, and 40,000 Kansans were left without insurance. I would go exactly the opposite route. I would let patients buy whatever insurance they want to buy. And as soon as you start having them compete like that, costs are going to have to start coming down. Insurance companies are going to come to doctors and hospitals and say, we need to know the price. I'm a part owner of an imaging center, and if somebody asked me what an MRI costs, I don't think I could answer them. It is such an opaque, complex system. I don't know. $6,000. Well, $6,000 is the monopoly money that they say that it costs. What do they actually reimburse? Probably like $200. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't know how to figure out what something actually costs in healthcare because we've made it so complicated. Does anybody in this room have any frustrations with their car insurance? Raise your hand if you hate your car insurance. Now think about that. We treat car insurance like insurance. That's a novel concept. Insurance is when you buy something to protect you against the possible but unlikely. We don't buy car insurance to change our tires or to get a car wash or to get new windshield wipers put on or to change our oil. We know those expenses are coming. We brace for them. We take care of them. And the cost of those are way lower when we go to Jiffy Lube than if you had to send an application to Kathleen Sebelius and the federal government and you got a voucher to have it come back and they tell you where to go and you go across town. That's how we treat health insurance. So if you had a health insurance policy that would cover the unexpected, you know you're going to have an annual visit. You know if you have kids, you're going to show up in the ER at least once. Brace for it. Plan for it. The cost will go lower. You'll force the hospital and the doctor to give you better rates because if you start getting on the phone and saying, hey, what does it cost for an ER visit at your place? Oh, no, thank you. They will listen real quickly. We can change it. We can change healthcare in America very simply just by following free market principles, always being mindful that there will be some people who will fall through the cracks. And as that moral principle, we will never abandon someone who can't take care of themselves.
Great. We'll take one more question. If anybody has a question. Looks like you've done it. Wait, okay, here we go.
I just have to take advantage of this opportunity to talk to somebody who's a member of the family. As a member of Barack's family, can you give us any insight into why there are so many issues about his identity, the way he sealed his records, and this whole hubbub over his birth certificate, which appears to be a fraud on the face of it? Thank you.
I would say I don't know. I don't know where, I mean, the bottom line question that I get asked a lot, where was he really born? And I've come up with about a dozen great joke answers for that. But one of which was secretly he was born in Kansas, but He made a special deal with with KU Jayhawks that we knew he would just he would end up ruining our chances of ever winning again, and so he claimed he was born in Hawaii. Now, I don't know where any of my cousins were born. I guess with true certainty, but I also have to say this, and I'm sympathetic to the idea to the notion that we need to stay true to our Constitution. And I would say moving forward, I would encourage every state to pass laws that say that every voter and every candidate can prove who they are, can prove that they should vote, and prove that they can run. Now, if he can prove that, then more power to him, that's great. And same with the voters. That they need simple voter ID. It's not that hard. But I would say this, and one of the reasons I haven't, and I get asked this all the time, and it happens to be that Hawaiian law has certain provisions for family members and birth certificates and these sorts of things, and I've never wanted to be a part of this, and not because the media likes to just make fun of birthers. I'm not scared of what the media says about people. They say things about me. But I'll tell you this. I want to beat Barack Obama in the marketplace of ideas. I don't want to turn him into a martyr. Now, moving forward, I want to protect our Constitution, and I want him to prove that he's eligible to be on every ballot, but I don't want to beat him on a technicality. Like I said earlier, I want to take liberalism, I want to level its cities, and I want to salt its fields. I want the world to know that they should never be in office again.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. He told me I could call him Milton, and I said, call me Morton. With two first names like that, we need all the help we can. But Milton, I'd like, as a token of our appreciation, to present to you one of the Leadership Institute's 8 different models of Adam Smith ties.
Look at that.
Thank you. After I stood up during the Q&A, Brian Burness over here passed me a note that was in familiar handwriting. It's my wife's. And Helen wrote to me to make sure I would see it while I was standing on the stage. She said, Morton, to think you wondered if he would be a good speaker. Well, obviously, this guy is not only a good writer, he's a good speaker, and underlying it all, he's a great thinker. Of course, now we will have to dismantle all of the teleprompters which were set up here so we can do our next event. You all saw the teleprompters, right? Any of you who are interested in acquiring Adam Smith neckties or our Adam Smith scarves for ladies or our Adam Smith cufflinks, please, after this breakfast, go up to the 5th floor. My assistant, Kathy Graham, will be happy to provide you with whatever Adam Smith attire that you want. I was last week in England teaching at the Leadership Institute's 5th annual International School of Fundraising. Adam Smith ties originated there, and actually a couple of people who came to the school were wearing Adam Smith ties that were produced there, but the Leadership Institute is the sole producer and distributor of Adam Smith ties in the United States. I invite you to join us on Wednesday, May 2nd. Our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast speaker will be Dr. Richard Rahn, who is a former Vice President, Chief Economist at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, was one of the economists who was most valuable to the Reagan administration, in which I served. He is now chairman of the Institute for Global Economic Growth. You have seen his columns run often as well in the Washington Times. Richard Rahn is a superb speaker, and I'm sure you will enjoy him. I would like now to invite anybody who is interested on a tour of the Leadership Institute and our edition in the building next door to meet with Trey McKenzie here at the podium after breakfast. Here's Trey. Raise your hand. Everybody can see you. Trey will give you a first-class tour. And again, I thank Dr. Milton Wolfe. It was a real treat. Everybody I know will join me in thanking you for coming and say how much we appreciate your not only your wisdom but your eloquence. Thank you.